Hey guys, what's up and welcome back to another video. If you're new to my channel, welcome. My name's Melissa. Around here you're gonna find a lot of beauty content. I just really happen to love makeup and all things beauty, so that is what I like to talk about. And specifically on Mondays, I like to do an in-depth review and a tutorial featuring the eyeshadow palette of the week. And for this week, we're gonna use something from Natasha Denona. So the palette that we're gonna use today is the Sunset palette. Let's just take a second to ooh and ah over how gorgeous this palette is. And of course, when you open it up, there's a nice warm sunset color story. Now this particular palette does happen to be a limited edition, yet it is still currently available. I did happen to pick this up on clearance, and I say that loosely because it was still $64.50 from Sephora. And if I am correct, they are not currently running that sale anymore, but you can find this at other retailers. And of course, later on in this video, which will be part 2, we're going to deep dive into this palette, talk about all the little details about my experience with it and my personal thoughts. But the first thing in the plan of action is to get into the tutorial. And for today's tutorial, we're gonna do a typical sunset eye. And when I see a color story like this, what more do I want to do? A sunset eye just speaks to me. So we're gonna do something really big and bold today. We're gonna use a lot of the pretty colors in here, and I can't wait to show you what it looks like. Alright guys, welcome to part 1 of this video, which happens to be the tutorial. The first thing I always like to do before anything is get started with my eye prep steps. Now I know not everybody likes to see this part, so I'm going to go ahead and pop up a timestamp right here of where you can go if you just want to get right on into the eye look. But of course, if you want to see all the eye prep steps, let's get right on into it. So guys, about 20 minutes ago, I went ahead and I put some Visine into both of my eyes. I typically have pretty watery eyes, and I found that this really helps me before eyeshadow. So now that the Visine's been sitting a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and take this Kate Somerville eye cream and put some moisturization back into the eye area. And I've been using this eye cream like crazy. And this happens to be my favorite method of application because you don't have to dig your fingers into any type of jar or anything. It just squeezes right out of the tube. You can control exactly how much you want to put it exactly where you want it to go. And it's very pleasant being able to rub it in with this tip on here like this. So this specific product is very lightweight, and it's definitely more like a serum than an actual eye cream. But you can feel the silicones in it, so I really like this before makeup because it really creates a smooth surface before you put any product on your eye. So I just like to take a few minutes and just give this a nice rub and kind of prep the eye area before I put on any of my primers. Next, I'm going to hit up my favorite Revlon Candid Concealer, and I'm going to go ahead and put this on my underbrow area for my first step of priming. Now, I always like to mention that this looks a lot better if you have your eyebrows done. But I don't have any makeup on my face at all except for a little bit of gloss on my lips right now. So when you do this, it really creates definition between your actual eyebrow and your eyeshadow look. So that's why I really like to do it. And it really highlights the brow bone area. And something else that I really like to do during this part is bring that concealer out towards this area of my nose. And it creates some definition right here, so it gives your eye look more structure. And also keep in mind that we're doing a big blown out look today, so I'm going to go ahead and prime my temple area too because the eyeshadow is going to come all the way out here. So I want to have a nice base for all that shadow to sit out here as well. So now I got a fresh brush and I got my NARS eyeshadow primer, and I'm going to go ahead and take this little doe foot and line my eye with it and put this up into my crease just about 3/4 of the way out from the inner part. The more I use this primer, the more I find it easier to work in stages with this one because it's a little bit hard to work with. I do love the end results of how this looks, so I kind of put up with it, but it is not the easiest thing I've ever used in my life. And lastly, we can't forget about some loose finishing powder. I don't really care for this on my face so much because it is a really heavy powder, but this is fantastic for the eye. I have mine in the shade light medium, and I find that the shade is the perfect shade for setting my eye primer, and it really gives me a nice overall look and just a really great finish. And don't be afraid at all of this powder. Just kind of layer it on there, and you can always dust off any excess that you find kind of builds up a little bit. And I know we're going to talk about this during the review, but I do want to make it clear that I tested this palette on both a set and an unset base, and this palette in particular works way better if you take a few extra minutes and do this prepping routine on your eye. And of course, we could always do more to fully prep the eye area, but that's all I kind of feel like doing for today. And now I'm just ready to get on into the eyeshadow look. So what we're going to do is create a sunset gradient from the inner corner to all the way out here, and I'm just going to use the same brush for the entire thing. And I do have a little bitty towel right here that I'm going to use to wipe the brush off in between shades. And the brush I'm using today is from Larouche Beauty, and of course if you're ever interested in anything I'm using in specific, I always have everything linked down below in the description box. So the first shade I'm going into is the deep cool brown called Igneous, and this is going to be our inner corner shade. So what I did is I mentally split my eye into 5 different sections. And on each section, I'm gonna have a different color. And of course, in the end, we're gonna blend all the colors together. But the first thing I'm gonna focus on is depositing each color to its designated area. So I'm taking this above the crease, and I even want this to go onto my lid. And if you can see, I went about a 1/4 inch from my crease to the top of my nose area. So once I get that shade on there, I'm wiping my brush off, and then I'm gonna hit the warm brown shade called Volcano. And I'm going to do the same thing and put this on the next 5th. And I'm bringing that all the way down onto my lid. And then you see how my eye wants to naturally curve down. I'm going to try to keep this straight with the next shade I go into. And the next shade is the red shade called Pungent. So instead of following this natural curvature, I'm going to try to keep this a little bit straight. And just like the other shades, you want to follow suit with bringing it all the way down to your lash line. And when I'm blending this red, you can see that my eyebrow interferes with it. And at this point, don't worry about your eyebrow, just go right on over it. And also, this is the point where you're going to want to start bringing the shadow down. Don't worry about how low it goes because we're going to clean this up in the end. So if you feel like you're going too low, that's quite all right. We can go lower. You just don't want to have it end up being too short where we can't rectify it. Again, still hanging on to the same brush. Now I'm going into the bright orange shade called Horizon. And I'm going to continue on with this straight line just a little bit further. And our last shade, which will be the last 5th of our eye space right here, will be the only yellow in this palette called Soul. Now, just by using the shade the past few days, I think it's kind of chalky. If you ask me, that's my opinion. So I find that the lighter the hand that I use with it, the better it turns out. It's still not the best yellow I've ever used in my life, but you can kind of get it to where you need it to go if you use a light hand. So before I do the inner corner and clean up all this, I'm going to go ahead and do my waterline. And for this, I'm just going to take a brightening color. So you can use any color that looks brightening on your skin tone. And for this, I'm taking, let me swatch it for you. I'm taking this color right here, and this is the Tarte Double Take Awake liner. Now this shade is super brightening, so I'm just going to do a really light layer of it. I don't want it to look, out of place on my eye or anything, so I just kind of want it to mesh in. So now the next thing I like to do is go ahead and just finish up the lower lash line. So I'm taking a really tiny pencil brush for that, and I'm going back into the red shade called Pungent, and I'm going to take this on the outer 4th of my lower lash line. So I'm going to do this pretty heavily and of course match it up with the bottom of what we already have going on. And same brush, I'm going into that warm tone brown called Volcano. And what I want to do with this shade is kind of just tie in the browns that we have going on the top with what we have going on the bottom. So I'm just going to put a little bit of this from the red and kind of just blend it into my bare skin area. I don't need a lot of it, but just a little bit to shade the bottom lash. And then I want to put something orange on the inner part, but before I do that, I want to go ahead and blend out this inner corner deep dark cool brown. So to blend this out, I'm just going to hang on to this same little pencil brush, and what I did is I really wiped this off so there's no more pigment on my brush whatsoever. For all intents and purposes, it's very clean. And I'm just going to drag this cool brown down so it kind of blends out, and I want to do it in a circular motion so it kind of hooks to the lower lash line. Now remember, I don't have any additional product on my brush. I'm just using what we have left over from the top and just swinging that down to the lower lash line. And now since that's blended, I'm gonna go ahead and take this bright orange shade called Morgana, and I'm gonna put this from the very inner corner and match it up with that brown center. I think this shade looks really pretty right here because it's kind of unexpected, and if you really build it up, it just gives that bright pop that I always look for on the lower lash line. So guys, we're almost to the part where we get to clean all this up and get to see the reveal. But of course, we have to do something really fun and flashy on the lid. It wouldn't be an eye look without that. So I'm gonna go back into that Double Take Awake liner pencil that I showed you from before, but this time I'm taking that black micro liquid liner, and I'm gonna go ahead and do a pretty thick line on my upper lash line. And if you feel like it, you can go ahead and wing it out, but for this look, I didn't really find it absolutely necessary to have a wing. But the thing is, we're gonna stamp something on top of this for a really high shine sparkle, so make sure you make it thick enough so we have enough space to do that. Now I'm going to take a really fine detailed liner brush, and I'm going into the shade called Aubade. You can use essentially any of these really awesome metallic shades in here that you want. And I'm going to cover that entire liner with this shade. Now it's the fun part, so you can use whatever you want to clean this up. I'm just gonna go ahead and take a makeup wipe, and you wanna make sure that you have a steady hand and just go ahead and line it up. So here's what the eye look looks like kind of done, but without any mascara or anything. So I'm just going to take my MAC Magic Extension Mascara, and I'm just going to throw a quick coat of this on just to kind of give it a little bit of a final touch. Now, I just recently did a wear test on this mascara, and you know, the thing is, I just don't like it. I did pick this mascara for my monthly makeup routine, so that's why I'm just going to get some use out of it. But after this month is over, I am so done with this mascara, and I can't wait to get another one that I actually like. And also, if you're a person that likes to wear false lashes, I think false lashes would look really great with this particular look. Alright, so here's the finished eye look. I'm gonna go ahead and jump off camera, complete this other eye, and then I'll be right back and we'll talk about this. Okay guys, I'm back, and here's a fully completed eye look, and I must say, I do like this eye look. This isn't something that's new or original. I've done this eye look every time I get a sunset palette, so it's something I've been doing for a long time. I just really like this one because you get to use a lot of different shades in the palette, and you get to use mattes, metallics. You can actually use any shades that you want. And there's really no actual structure that you have to keep. You just kind of make it your own shape as you go. So yeah guys, this is a look I'm going to keep on doing well into the future with many other palettes that I have in my collection. And now if you're curious to hear more about this palette, then let's get into part 2 of this video, which is my in-depth review. Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of this video, which is my in-depth review, and today we're going to be talking about this palette right here, which is from Natasha Denona, and this is called the Sunset palette. And you all know the first thing I always like to talk about is the palette's packaging, and can we talk about this deluxe stuff right here? So here's the actual palette, and then this is the little cardboard packaging it comes in. Now, due to the actual fabrication of the palette, there's not very much information that this tells you, so I do always like to keep my palettes in here in case I ever need to reference this for anything. But the actual palette is a very luxe, sturdy stitch foam. I do really love how this looks and feels, but I do have an issue with it. Due to it being crafted from a foam, it grabs onto all the little particulate matter that you create from, you know, swatching your eyeshadows, and your palette cannot stay clean in the slightest. Even if you try to wipe this down, it's very difficult because everything seeps into the foam. So I'm not crazy about that because I like to keep my stuff clean looking, but that is definitely a con of this palette in particular. But when you open it up, you do have a nice mid-sized mirror inside, and this palette does flip all the way back, which I do happen to like. You do have this plastic overlay, which I did mention earlier in the video, which gives you all the names of each shadow plus which type of formula it is. Now each shade in this palette is magnetized in the pan, so if you have a pretty heavy duty magnet, you can just pop each shade out, rearrange it, put them in a different palette, whatever you see fit. Now I know a lot of the newer Natasha Denona palettes have the little pinpoints in the back where you can just pop them out that way, but these are just magnetized. Now in this layout, you're getting a selection of 15 different eyeshadows. There are no pressed pigments in this palette, so all these shades are deemed safe by the FDA for use around the eye area. And each shade in here weighs a whopping 2.5 grams each, so that's an outstanding amount of eyeshadow, and that's well above the average amount per pan. Now keep in mind, when you have a higher end palette like this, you're paying for more diversity within the formula. So you're not supposed to just get mattes and shimmers in here, you're supposed to get a wide selection. Now Natasha Denona has a certain name for each of these formulas, and according to my observations, I came up with 3 different unique formulas in here. From what I observed, I found 8 true mattes, 5 actual metallics, and then 2 shimmer toppers. Now, like I said, if you look on the Natasha Denona website, she has a specific name for each one of these formulas, but for the sake of today's video, I'm just gonna keep it simple as that. Real quick, I'm gonna throw up a picture of some swatches that I took from this palette so you can see how every shade looks swatched on my skin. And now, getting into the routine data check, the first thing I always like to tell you is that this palette is not clarified to be any sort of clean formula by any standard or any type of conscious beauty effort. This palette is cruelty-free, but it is not vegan. And if you do look on the back of this palette, there's a little sticker right here, and it will tell you that there is a 24-month expiration after opening date. Now moving into the cost evaluation, this is where I'm going to lose a lot of you because this is a crazy price for this palette. If you went out and bought this as it is today, it would cost you $129. Now bear in mind, I caught this on sale, and you might be able to find it on sale, or you can pay resale for it, but if you did buy it from a retail outlet, the price is $129. Breaking that down a little bit, it comes to $8.60 per shade. Breaking that down a bit further, it comes to $3.44 per gram. So any way you look at this palette, if you compare it to other palettes available on the market, comparing this to other palettes that I've previously reviewed, any sort of way that I look at it, this palette is just overall expensive. Now guys, let's move into the most opinionated section of this video, which is my recommendation. The first thing I want to talk about is my usage experience. So I want to tell you exactly how this performed since I've been using it. And the first thing I want to talk about is patchiness. I know a lot of people have questions about patchiness, as do I when I'm being introduced to a new formula, and especially when you're paying this much for a palette, you don't want the formula to be patchy. Now here's the thing, when I did my eye look on Saturday, I took a picture of it with some assistance lighting, and when I held that lighting up to my eye, I did see some patchiness with it. But when I didn't have any lighting up to my eye, the eye look looked perfectly blended and I didn't see any patchiness. So I'm kind of confused on this, and this isn't the first time this has happened to me with Natasha Denona. It happens with every single palette that I've used from her. I can never tell if the formula is straight up patchy or not. So you guys let me know in the comments if you struggle with this too. Does the formula end up being patchy for you, or is this just me? So the next thing I want to talk about is the longest I wore an eyeshadow look coming out of this palette so far has been 6 hours. Now I did a little bitty mini wear test on this eyeshadow look, and after that 6 hours, I will say I didn't notice any creasing whatsoever, but I did notice significant wear and lots of color fading. So that was definitely shocking and a very disappointing result for me. As for staining, since none of these are pressed pigments, I wasn't really worried about it, and I didn't have any staining whatsoever. As for blendability, I always like to talk about how well a shadow formula blends. Now this could be kind of a tricky topic because everybody has a different opinion of what a shadow formula should blend like. But for me, I like to test it on both a primed and set base, and then I like to test it on an untouched bare eye. I know a lot of people like to do either or, so I like to give it a shot in both ways. And I can tell you there was a significant difference between the bare eye and the one that I went and set and primed. On the side that was bare, I got some super harsh lines that I was definitely not able to blend out, and on the primed and set eye, I had no issue blending whatsoever. So I think if you have this palette, or if you're planning on getting it, or any sort of thing like that, definitely recommend you take the few extra minutes, use an eye primer, set that primer with some loose finishing powder, and be on your way. By doing that, you're going to get the maximum performance out of this palette that you possibly can. So all shades in here are going to give you some kickback. Don't be surprised about that. This is a very softly pressed formula, so all of them are going to do that for you. But interestingly enough, I didn't have any fallout from this palette. Even with the very highly metallic shades or any of the deeper mattes, nothing fell out on my face. And the metallics do have some loose mica particles in them, but they didn't fall out all over my makeup and ruin my base. So if you're a person that likes to do your base makeup first, you can definitely do that with this palette and not have to do your eyes first. So moving into some critiques about this palette, I always like to look at a palette's range, and here I do appreciate that it goes from light to mid-tone to deep, and you also have multiple options for depth, which does increase the palette's versatility. Now I also do want to point out, especially for this high end of a palette, that I noticed 3 instances of shade redundancy in here. So this shade and this shade look very similar while swatched together. These 2 shades look similar, and these 2 shades look similar. And they look similar enough to the point that I don't think they warrant all being in the same palette, and they would perform the exact same function upon the eye. So yeah, that kind of aggravates me that within a 15 pan color story that we have 3 shade repetition things happening in here. Now in a larger color story, I always like to say that I do like to see a matte black. Now this is a warm, cool, deep brown in here, and it is a matte shade. And I do notice that this swatch is really deep, and I do think that this would perform in lieu of a matte black. So if you are looking for a shade like that, this would serve just as beneficial. And I also want to say that I did find a dud shade in here. There's a shade right here called Ice Gold, and this is technically what I would consider to be a shimmer topper. There are 2 shimmer toppers in this palette, and this one is not like the other one. This one is very difficult to pick up. It's almost like it has hard pan, but it truly doesn't have hard pan. It's just very difficult to pick up either with your finger or with a brush. And then when you finally do get some product picked up, it barely applies. It's just a dud shade, and I don't like to see any dud shades, especially when you're paying $129 per palette. So let me give you some quick formula highlights. I just want to tell you the most important attributes of both the mattes and the non-mattes. So for the mattes, if you're trying to blend 2 shades together, I found that very difficult because it created some awkward spacing in between the 2, and it almost created, like I said earlier, that patchiness, but it wasn't necessarily patchiness. It was just that awkward space that's really undefinable. Especially if you're trying to blend 2 darker colors together, it just doesn't look right in my opinion. And also the mattes are definitely a more buildable formula in lieu of being directly pigmented, and formulas that are more buildable are definitely a lot easier to manage and control. As for the non-mattes, I do want to point out that 2 of the metallics in here are technically duochrome, but as far as my experience with them, I only noticed a very slight shift with them, and they're not really special shades in my opinion. Any duochrome shift that you're going to see in here is just very slight and not like any of the other duochromes or multi-chromes that you see on the market. I also attempted all application methods with the non-mattes. I tried my finger, a damp brush, and a dry brush, and it didn't matter which method I used, they all worked just fine. However, if you want the best, most vibrant intensity, try using them with a damp brush. So yeah guys, if you ever spotted this palette on clearance, or if you were willing to take that risk for $129 and you've just been on the fence about this, I'm just betwixt and recommending this. This is one of those situations where you gotta seriously look at the pros and cons of this and gauge whether this is gonna bring value to your individual collection. I truly see some good things about this, and then I really see some bad things about this. And of course, I have 3 reasons why I say that. My first reason is that in order for this to give you its best performance, you have to completely prep and set your base. Now, this is a problem, especially if you're a person that doesn't like to do that. If you're a person that typically works on a bare eye, you're not going to get the best blending performance out of any of these shades in here. My second reason is that the 3 instances of shade repetition here are highly questionable. I would personally question the amount of repetition in a $70 palette, and I surely don't want to see it in a $129 palette. So I think that is definitely something to be very mindful of before you purchase this. And my last and final reason is that all the shades in here are just normal. You're paying $129 for average formulas. There are absolutely no special shades in here. I think if you're paying that $129 luxury price, you should be able to knock into some never before seen formulas or attempts at it or something that, you know, you don't see in an average $40 palette. In here, all these shades can be done in a $20, $30, $40 palette is what I'm trying to say. So yeah guys, when I rated this palette for this week, I gave it a B. And by that I mean I like it just fine, but I did experience some flaws with it, and it definitely didn't knock my socks off. So yeah guys, that is all I have for today's video. I hope you found it helpful and enjoyed it. And if you did, please give me a giant thumbs up. And if you didn't like it, just hit that thumbs down button. And until next time, bye.